Welcome to session number, let me find out here for sure, session number 16 of an Introduction to Biblical Prophecy. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines and here in the US and via Facebook and YouTube. People all over the world. I got an email from a fella in Russia the other day, kind of fine. And his English was fine, which is also amazing. Every time I've been in Russia, I've had to use translators, and that seems to work. Today, we're going to be looking at a continuation in the study of the Old Testament covenants and the nature of the covenant structure in biblical prophecy. And in the outworking of God's plan in history. Because often in the biblical covenants, we're going to see predictions of what will happen. So the covenant structure gives us a background or foundation for God's intention with history. And today we're going to look at a thing that's often called the Palestinian covenant, which in today's world is often mistaken. It is not understood well, but it's often called the Deuteronomic covenant, simply because of that, because it's found in the book of Deuteronomy in chapters 27 through 30. Really, we can think of the whole book of Deuteronomy as a kind of a restatement of the covenant with Israel. The Mosaic covenant, primarily Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, was given at the beginning of the 40 years, and the Deuteronomic covenant is given at the end of that 40-year wandering, just as the people are going into the land. And so it's a second expression of Torah, of this expression of the character of God. And the Deuteronomic covenant or Palestinian covenant is focused on the land of Israel. This is on the verge of going into the land, and Moses' message is about the blessing that will come to Israel as a nation if they learn to walk with God and be a blessing to one another. That's a phrase that I've learned to use for this kind of thing. It's been around for a long time. I didn't invent it, but walk with God and be a blessing is pretty much what this covenant is all about. The Mosaic covenant and the Deuteronomic covenant are strongly related, but the Deuteronomic covenant is primarily important for its introduction of the blessings and the curses of following Mosaic law. Now, again, I have to back up because every time I do this, I have to realize that the video needs to stand on its own to some extent. So the Mosaic law is built on the 10 so-called commandments, the 10 words of God through Moses that are divided up into a major part that talks about God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no graven images. And you shall not take the name of your God in vain. And you shall keep the Sabbath. Okay, those 4 laws have to do with the believer's conviction that there is no God but Yahweh, and that He, the Creator, the King of the universe, alone deserves our worship, the submission of all that we are to this God who is worthy of infinitely more. That's what worship is. essentially. The first commandment, the second, actually the third, and the fourth, all have to do with this concept of trusting worship in the God who exists alone in the universe and the creator of all else. And the nations, the way this is used in Deuteronomy in particularly, are the surrounding pagan nations who have rejected the concept of one God. And I use that term deliberately. Uh, Non-Christians are not unaware that the logic and the evidence point to a single supreme being. There has to be one supreme being. There cannot be three or four supreme beings. And the evidence suggests design and purpose and meaning and the rest, and all of that points to one true God. Romans 1 is very clear that they are without excuse who reject the one true God and turn aside to idols. Centering your life around anything that is not the God of reality is idolatry in the biblical terminology. If I choose second best, then whatever else I might say about my choice, I am choosing something less than God. I am building my life around a lie, and that is idolatry in the purest sense of the term. So those first four commandments are very important. The fifth through the 10th commandments have to do with our relationships with one another. The first focus is on the family. The family is absolutely essential. It's the core of God's plan for uh, all of human civilization. It's the family is central to society. The family is central to human government. The family is the key to a godly education. The family is essential to a functioning economy in the world. And God's emphasis on the family is not to say, oh, those single parents are evil people. No, it's to say more broadly that to the extent that you build your society and your economy around healthy, functioning families, and the extent to which you support and maintain from generation to generation these truths that are universal and always true, you're going to enjoy a stable economy, a stable society, a stable civilization. These commandments again are not salvation issues. Now, the first four commandments those really have to be a salvation issue. If you have rejected God, well, you're probably not a saved person. Now, we do find a lot of believers, and in the Old Testament, we get a lot of stories of believers who walked away from their faith in God. That doesn't necessarily make them unsaved people, although we can argue which came first, the chicken or the egg. But for Israel, the point is, as a nation, they started out with a relationship to God. They were saved people in the Old Testament sense, and they don't lose that. But whether they enjoy the blessing of prosperity in the land that God has promised, or they are cast out into the realm of the nations, where there is idolatry and where there are transvestites and where there is evil, where there is murder, where all of the bad things that God commands against are welcomed and commonly practiced. Um, And so that the blessing and the cursing that we see in Deuteronomy have primarily to do with the stability of the nation in the land. So there's very much a land thing going on here. Let me get over to the share. Let's see if we can make this happen. Okay, it's trying, very trying. There we go. Okay, so sometimes we call it Palestinian covenant, sometimes we call it the Deuteronomic covenant. And I'm just going to read some bits from the book of Deuteronomy. By the way, this photograph is a famous photograph. It was taken by a Life magazine photographer back in 1967 during the Six-Day War, when the Israelis first retook what the Jordanians like to call the West Bank, but this is Jerusalem and the Wailing Wall. And these young men are paratroopers who first broke through the Jordanian lines of the so-called what did they call that? Uh, Now I can't remember, but the British trained legion of Arab soldiers who had held Jerusalem. These men broke through that line, and while shots were still being fired, they came to the Western Wall in wonder that they had themselves personally been the ones to retake Jerusalem, the holy city, for the people of Israel. And that's the look on their face. And it was captured by a photographer with Life magazine who was being shot at while he took this picture. So this is a historic thing. The idea of the return of Israel to the land is reiterated all over the Old Testament, and for that matter, the New Testament. We'll get to that when we get further into the study. The Palestinian covenant is essentially a restating of Moses' law with the 10 words, the 10 commandments at the beginning, and a recitation of quite a number of the representative statutes and commands, the laws. There's 620 or 640 odd laws. It's interesting when we compare them, the specific laws that are brought up in Deuteronomy are in many cases somewhat different from the laws that we see in particular in Exodus. They're not identical. It's as though over 40 years' time, the judges of that era under Moses had added some case law. If this happens, then this should happen. Moses incorporates that into the book of Deuteronomy and thus makes it the word of God. He's not contradicting himself. He's using the 10 words, the 10 commandments or principles that God had given as the foundation for building a living law. And it's very important to understand that those 10 words are designed as universal and eternal principles that apply to the making of actual civil and ritual law for Israel. But the foundation of all true religion for all time. Civil law for a nation that loves God of any stripe, whatever kind of Christian, whatever kind of Jewish nation there is. If they love God, then a civil law will be built around these principles. And the message of Deuteronomy is that if you want to live long in this land and prosper in this land and eat the fruit of the land and have healthy families, then these 10 commandments need to be the foundation of your society. You worship the one true God and you love one another. Those are the two commandments as Jesus lays it out. And that's a good summary. Love the Lord your God with all your mind and soul and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if we were to do that, if that was the basis of all of society, it would be a good start. Society would be much more stable. In the modern world, a great deal of the instability, the unrest, the anger that we find is the result of people who have rejected God, who have rejected the truths of the basic principles. Murder is okay today if you happen to be of the right skin color or the right religious motivation. Um, Stealth is okay if you're big enough. If you're a government, you can steal all the money you want. If you're a highly paid government bureaucrat, you can inside trade and turn yourself into a multimillionaire, and that's okay. It's part of the good old boys club. When society breaks down in that way, it's a curse. And that ultimately is the principle of Deuteronomy. So, beginning at, let's see, chapter 27 basically says uh, when you get across the river here, the Jordan River, and God gives you rest from your enemies, you should go up onto Mount Ebal. Now, there's two mountains at the place called Shechem. Now, that's a very, very interesting story. I'm not going to take you all the way through there, but Shechem is a place that we've already seen when Jacob came back to the promised land and brought his 12 sons and some daughters. There was a daughter named Dinah who apparently went out to hang around with some of the girls from the land, and she was taken and raped forcibly by a man from Shechem, the son of the head man of the city of Shechem, and the sons of Jacob responded to the rape of Dinah by destroying the city. They didn't destroy the city in the sense of killing everybody. They actually left the women alive. They killed the men. They left women and children alive, and the women and the children became part of Israel. And the city of Shechem was rebuilt as a mixed community. It was Israeli men who made wives of some of the widows of Shechem, who raised those children as their own, and the city came back. When Joshua came into the promised land, he didn't make war against the city of Shechem. They were considered family. And the people of Shechem actually welcomed the invasion of Joshua. It's interesting to note that um, the Tel El Amarna tablets in Egypt from this period have complaints from other Canaanite rulers that the king of Shechem has become Habiru, or in other words, Hebrew. He's become one of the invaders. So we do have outside of the Bible reports of this invasion of Israel. Anyway, when you get there, go up on Mount Ebal, which overlooks Shechem. And some of you will go over to Mount Gerizim. You'll shout the blessings and the curses to one another. But the curses come from Mount Ebal. And on that mountain, you're to build an altar and make sacrifices, make a holy uh, a holy day of remembering the covenant that God has made with you and that you have agreed to. And this remaking of the covenant on Mount Ebal and Gerizim is a restatement of what God has already said to Israel. It's an agreement of the people. Cursed be we, blessed be we, if we do this, if we do that. So the Palestinian or Deuteronomic covenant that we're going to see here is conditional. If if as saved people you do these things, then you will enjoy these blessings, or you will experience these curses. And the blessings are not so bad. The blessings have to do with prosperity in the land, but the curses are rather awful. The curses from Mount Ebal are listed here in the last part of chapter 27, beginning at verse 15. Cursed be the man who makes a carved or cast metal image, an abomination to the Lord, a thing made by the hands of a craftsman and set up in secret. And all the people shall answer and say, Amen. Cursed be anyone who dishonors his father or his mother, and all the people shall say, Amen. And it goes on through this. And the principles of the law are reiterated. And if we mess up, here is the curse. Interestingly, on Mount Ebal, near the remains of that Israelite altar, archaeologists several years ago found a small lead tablet with one of these curses written on it in the old Hebrew script. Again, it's a confirmation. We believe that this happened before we had the little lead tablet. But it's interesting to have the altar and the tablet, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and it's all really right there. It's all part of history. In chapter 28, there's a list of blessings. And this is again a very good thing. If you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all the commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. Yeah, well, that sounds like a good thing. That's in 28:1. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Okay, so here's a list of blessings. Now, those who argue that the Ten Commandments are a checklist for making sure you're going to heaven need to read a chapter like this, because what is described here is not heaven, but rather a stable and prosperous life on earth in this promised land. So Moses goes on, all these blessings shall come upon you. Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall you be, or shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in. Blessed shall you be when you go out. Now, blessed, of course, is a widely used word in both the Old and New Testament. It means happy. Happy or satisfied or content. There's a variety of words we can use there, but blessed works fine. You're looking for a blessing? Well, blessings are not hard to get. You obey the principles and the blessing comes. The blessing is not magic. The blessing is not some kind of hocus pocus that you can call down on yourselves. The blessing is the result of knowing and living by the principles of God's word. That's the fundamental point of this Deuteronomic covenant. There's a bunch of these, and they go on. The curses are fascinating. I'm going to walk through some of these curses. This begins at verse 15. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and the statutes I command you today, then these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, cursed shall you be in the field. Notice the parallel with what we heard before. Cursed shall be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of the ground and the increase of your herds and young. Cursed shall you be when you come out, and cursed shall you be when you go in. And in verse 21, the Lord will make the pestilence stick to you until he has consumed you off the land that you are entering to take possession of. In verse 25, the Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. When they go into the land, they're going to beat all of their enemies as long as they're walking with God and obeying him. When they begin to disobey God on the fundamental principles, they're going to begin to lose to their enemies, and their enemies will one day overtake them. You shall go out one way against them and 7 ways before them, and you shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. In other words, what's going to happen to the people of Israel is a terrible thing to behold. They're going to fall short of the blessing, and they're going to lose what God has promised them. So the Lord will curse you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall be oppressed. This is verse 29. You shall be only oppressed and robbed continually. There shall be no one to help you. Verse 33, a nation that you have not known shall eat up the fruit of your ground and of all your labors, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed continually. So your eyes see, and so that you are driven mad by the sights your eyes see. The Lord will strike you on the knees and the legs with grievous boils, which you cannot heal, from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head. The Lord will bring you and your king, whom you have over you, to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, and you shall become a horror, a proverb, and a byword amongst the peoples, where the Lord shall lead you away. Okay. I'm going to stop there. The point is, if you're obedient, you'll stay in the land, and it will be a good place for you, and you'll have a happy, prosperous society. If you walk away from God and his statutes, you're going to be driven out of the land. Your enemies will defeat you. You'll be exiled into other lands that you have not known. You'll be surrounded by these other gods that you have chosen to worship. And you will have to live by laws that are antithetic, that are opposite to what you have been taught. So what I'm doing with this list that you see on the slide is a bit of history of the nation of Israel. The first dispersion began in 606 BC, actually 722, but we won't worry about that one. 606 is when Judah and Jerusalem were first taken over by the nations, in particular Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. But that was the beginning of the treading underfoot of the Temple Mount and the city of Jerusalem, 606 BC. And the people of Israel in the north were unrelievedly evil from the time of Jeroboam to the end of their history in 722. And they were dispersed all over the world. And today it's very difficult to find anybody from who knows that he's from Zebulun or uh, Manasseh or the rest. Some people think they do, but it would be very difficult to prove that. The 10 tribes of the north were well and thoroughly dispersed all over the European, Asian, African world. There was a partial return of Judah, by that time known as the Jews, from Babylon in 530 BC, with some who returned from Egypt. It was a small minority, probably 5%, who came back in 530 BC. The vast majority of Jewish people uh, didn't come back to Jerusalem, uh, and in fact stayed in Mesopotamia or in Egypt or in other parts of North Africa. And they stayed there until very recent times. In 1948, when um, uh, uh, the Arabs rejected the establishment of the state of Israel, they also drove out all of their Jews. So something like 1.5 million Jews came from these lands of Europe at that time, and the Middle East and North Africa, back to Israel. That was a partial return. Okay, that's 530. In 100 AD, the various wars of the Jews against the Roman Empire ended with the Romans saying, "Okay, enough is enough. Everybody out." So Jerusalem itself was completely uh, depopulated. This was an ethnic cleansing happened to the Jews who were left in Jerusalem. They were told to get out. And that's about 100 AD. The city was renamed Aelia Capitolina. It was completely rebuilt as a pagan city. And for 240 years, roughly, it would be entirely a pagan city until Constantine, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, or of the Roman Empire, decreed that Christianity was legal in Rome, and that the city of Jerusalem was a holy city and that churches should be built. And at that time, churches were built in Jerusalem. Uh, but the Jews were still not allowed back into Jerusalem. It became a Christian city, stayed Christian until 640 AD. Uh, the return of uh, Jewish people to the land of Israel really didn't begin until the late 1900 or 1800s. Around 1880s, we see Jewish people coming primarily from what we call the Pale of Settlement in Poland and Western Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, um, some of the other Western Soviet Union um, areas. That was always the Pale of Settlement. That's what the place was a depopulated place where Jews were forced to settle from medieval times. After the depopulation of that same area by the Muslims, uh, and a lot of trouble, a whole lot of trouble. Okay, so the Jews began to return only in very modern times, and the return of Jews from all over the world continues to this day. Years ago, I was in a gift shop cafe area up at Tel Dan, which is in the north of Israel, way up in the north, as close as you can be to Lebanon in a major area, and ran into a jovial-looking, red-haired older fellow, taller than me, and he was wearing a yarmulke, a Jewish beanie with shamrocks all the way around. It was kind of I've forgotten the color of the whole beanie, but it was a light green with darker green shamrocks. I looked at him and I said, what's with the shamrocks on your beanie? And he looked over at me and he said, sure, and what would you be expecting an Irish Jew to wear? he was it was a funny line at the time. I thought, oh, okay, that's cute. I like that. And he came from Ireland, of all places. Ireland is a Catholic country, and the shamrock is the symbol of the Trinity. But here's an Irish Jew. I've met Australian Jews. I've met South African Jews. I've met American Jews, of course, in Israel. I've met Danish Jews and Swedish Jews, and Egyptian Jews and Russian Jews. They come from everywhere. And they've begun to, they continue to come to Israel in times of trouble. The Old Testament speaks of the 70th week of Daniel. It speaks of a time of trouble at the end of history. A time of Jacob's trouble is a term that's used in the Old Testament, and Jesus picks this up in the New Testament. The time of Jacob's trouble is a time leading up to the final judgment, a time when Jacob will suffer the final woes of this string of curses that begins with this dispersion in 606 BC. And it all goes back to the prediction. I'm sending you into the land, and you're going to experience a blessing or a curse. If it's a blessing, you'll be prosperous in this land. And that was an honest promise. The curse is also an honest promise. If you fail to live by these principles, you're going to be driven out, and it's going to be a very unhappy time for everyone. Daniel speaks of this period from 606 BC to the end of the 70th week as the time of the Gentiles. Well, actually, Daniel doesn't use that phrase, but he speaks of the Gentiles trampling down one nation after another the holy places of Jerusalem. Jerusalem and the nation of Israel will be continually controlled, desecrated by the Gentiles who surround you. And that began in 606 BC. It didn't end with the coming of the Romans. It didn't end with the coming of the Christians even. The Gentiles include the Arab Muslim invaders of 640 AD. When the Muslims came in 640, they drove out the Jews, they drove out the Christians. There was a partial return of some Christians during the 200 years of the Crusades, but then they were driven out again. And the Jews have always been a minority in this land since 606 BC. And the control by the Arab Muslims of the Temple Mount continues to this day. Many people don't realize that after these paratroopers took the Temple Mount away from Jordan in 1948, the government of Israel, hoping for some peace, gave control of the Temple Mount and the Muslim and Christian holy places back to the Muslims. It was the Islamic Waqf is still to this day in charge and has the right to tell the Jews that they can't come up onto their most holy site, the Temple Mount. This is what we call the time of the Gentiles. Well, Jesus calls it the time of the Gentiles. He says this temple will be destroyed and it will be trampled underfoot until the time of the Gentiles is completed. And if it began in 606 and is defined by the Gentiles occupying and controlling the Temple Mount, then those four nations are Babylon, Persia, the Greco-Roman people, followed by the Muslim invaders. And that continues to the present day. We're not done with the time of the Gentiles yet. But at the end of the time of the Gentiles, there will be, well, among other things, the second coming. Christ will return. Among other things, there will be the 70th week of Daniel, which is the 7-year tribulation period. This is where we get all of this. See, Deuteronomy then is very, very important for laying out the foundation of the structure of biblical prophecy from this time forward. The second coming happens at the end of that tribulation period. It ends the last terrible war of that period, which will be a war for the nation of Israel. Israel will be up to their eyeballs in very bad things, worse than what we're seeing today. This horrible war with Hamas is not the tribulation period. It may be a forerunner to it. We don't know. We won't know until it happens. But this sort of thing will continue until the end, and then Christ will come. And that appearance will lead to the setting up of the messianic or millennial kingdom. And Christ himself will fulfill the ultimate blessing of Israel by setting up a kingdom in Jerusalem with his temple and his palace on the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. This will be a good thing, not a bad thing. This will be a good thing. And the kingdom age is something we're going to want to look at in a bit more detail in another session. But that kingdom age is very carefully defined in the Old Testament. And when we spend time looking at what the prophets have to say about the kingdom of the Messiah, we're going to understand that it has to be earthly, it has to be a length of time, that it is yet another test. The New Testament makes it clear that at the end of that kingdom age, there will be a great failure, there'll be a rebellion, people who choose to follow the devil instead of following Christ, and there'll be another great war. So the millennium is not forever and ever in heaven. People will be born and will die. People will commit sin, which will be judged harshly. It's a less than perfect time. Much better than anything has ever been, because there will be no overt sin, but there will be a sin nature. So the millennium is an important concept. It can be confusing. It can be difficult, but it's something that's worth studying. We'll spend a whole session with the kingdom. The resurrection is actually divided up into several steps, and we're going to have to look at the resurrection also several different times. But the ultimate blessing is the resurrection of believers to the eternal state, the resurrection of unbelievers to eternal damnation. That's a final judgment. That doesn't really happen until the end of the millennium itself. That's when that, and there again, we go back to the book of Revelation, and we get that laid out in some detail. All of this follows from the Deuteronomic covenant. All of this is a fulfillment of what Moses promised to Israel that day. This is your land. God has given you this land. Here are the principles by which you will be blessed in this land. If you do these things, it will turn out very well for you. If you fail in these things, you're going to lose the blessing that I've promised you. Okay. That's a little shorter than usual, but I think I'm going to end there because this next one is likely to take us in the better part of an hour again. So I'm going to stop the share. Next time we'll be looking at what is called the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7 and the promise to David of an eternal kingdom, what that could possibly mean. That will give us quite a bit more meat to the concept of the kingdom. When we ask ourselves the question, what exactly is God promising to David? And when we get answers to that question, we're going to understand with much more precision what the Old Testament prophets mean when they talk about the kingdom. So, June, I hope that's a beginning to answering some questions. This is what the Bible actually is teaching about. And as we find the people of Israel living through history, we see them fulfilling this promise of a curse. They could have had the blessing. They could have accepted Christ as their Messiah 2,000 years ago, and history would have been so different. But they chose not to. So all of this cursedness has been theirs, and we're living through the last portion of that prophesied historical period. This is a literal fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies about Israel, and which makes it interesting times to be alive. I'm not always sure that that's a good thing, but it's interesting. Okay, I've unmuted everybody. It's been fun. Thanks for joining me today. I always appreciate this. I appreciate your time. I know that it's a sacrifice to take time out of a Wednesday night, or what is it, Tuesday morning in the Philippines. Thursday morning. I can never keep track of it. At some other time, and I'm so glad that you're all able to do this. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same place. Tune in then. Bye now.
Bye. Bye, Dr. John. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. Ciao tutti.
Okay, let's see.
Ciao,
Ciao a
grazie.
tutti.
Ciao, ciao.
Yeah.
Ciao ciao.
Salamat po.